Hello. Those of you who might be at some time maybe seeing this on a TV set, then I guess you would surmise that we, in fact, at the time this happened, in real time, we taped it. Well, it seems good to always start off something with being sort of spuriously obvious, to just set the right tone. But I was thinking that if indeed, since we're letting these be taped at times, and they may end up being shown on the public airways, that you might have been sitting there flipping through your channels, and perhaps first off maybe this was a PBS station or worse. There's just somebody standing here at a podium, and then I thought that they do have shows with guys standing up at podiums and women. But all these shows that I've ever seen are all on the basis, no matter who the lecturer is, psychiatrist, psychologist, minister, philosopher, the shows basically are on, quote, how to cope. But, just so that you'll know, there is a difference, those of you who might have tuned this in accidentally. This is about the fact that you don't have to cope. All right? We should get that distinction established. There is a fairly routine city scene that goes on. The intricacies are unnoted, as in all city scenes. The obvious is seen, the first story is seen, but there are intricacies. There are subversive communiques within that are very pregnant, and I was going to use it as an example. It goes in several fashions, but probably the most common one, let's take our part of the good old orb, the United States, and our president. That the president will be walking away from a news conference or walking across the lawn to get in his speedboat or his speed helicopter. And a reporter will stick out a microphone and will ask him if he has any comments regarding a certain affair going on. Do you have any comments regarding the current political upheaval in country X? Now, I ask you this. Are they, and we'll get into who they is because they're certainly not reporters. Those are just the mouthpieces. Those are just the Punch and Judies of what's going on. But are they asking the president, and of course we'll get into who the president is in a minute because he's not really the president. Are they asking, what actions might you take regarding this affair? Or are they really and merely asking for his comment? Come on, think about it. You got nothing else to do. Think about it a second. Now, this is never noticed. And for you people on tape, it's not a mistake. The reporter's not dumb. The president's not dumb. They're not green. They're not striped. They're not tall, hot, or cold. This is a transmission of energy going on, and I am simply picking out the clothes that it wears in the fashionable Beltway district of the District of Columbia. You hear it all of the time. It could be the president, it could be somebody else. We're going to get to the people that you really are impressed by, not the president and reporters, of course, you. But you're hearing the comment made. You're seeing this scene played out throughout life, and you never hear it this way. You're not supposed to, of course. But they say, Mr. President, regarding this pressing, potentially dangerous affair going on at such and such place, do you have any comments? And there are all sorts of ways that he may respond. But think now, one more time, of what I am presenting to you, the unnoted, subversive, unspeakable energy and messages that you can derive regarding the chemical flows of energy, or the electrical flows. Those of you that are smart enough to understand that chemistry is electricity. I keep saying electrochemical. Just the bad side effects of having an 8th grade education. Some of that stuff sticks with you, regardless of what happened. They asked, do you have any comments? Are they asking, what might you do about this? Might we be sending troops over there? Might we withdraw our ambassador? Might we engage in some sort of economic blockade? It's a problem. It's a situation. He knows what it is. He reads the papers. They say, do you have any comments? Are they soliciting him to say, we might take such and such actions? Or are they simply asking really for his comments? That is, what thoughts might you have about actions? There is, I hate to be this broad while being here on your planet, there is a world of difference. But before we get in, just one more second before we get into the real juicy part, notice he could respond, and it happens in life, in either of the ways. He could say, I do not want to comment on the situation right now. It's under consideration. That could be his comment. Or he could say, we're watching it with a great deal of interest. I'm sorry, I got to go. So he made a comment. He goes, no, we're all very concerned over it. Or he could say, if things do not improve by tomorrow, we have some definite economic plans in mind. But either way, they're two different things, but the ordinary ear never notices. Not that you have any particular interest or disinterest, but you do not notice that the question, do you have any comments, invites in an unmarked, unregistered way, it invites two distinct possible responses, which are energy flows. Now let me ask, you know, those of you that have been watching there on tape now for 2 or 3 minutes, I'm sure you're hip and up to date. You understand that I'm not talking about the president, I'm not talking about politics, I'm not talking about international affairs, I'm not talking about the press. We're talking about the life of life as it is manifested in man, being a conductor and a transmitter and a transformer, which of course is a form of a conductor. See, there's that damn 8th grade science again, but you knew that. The better way to put the question now that you are all up to a higher plane of consciousness and great perception is this. Does life want to know what action you and it might take at any given time? Or does life simply want to know, in some cases, what thoughts about action you might have? Remembering, if you need a reminder, amongst other things, that humans are differentiated amongst the other creatures here on the 3D planet, is not only can they act, they can do that other singular thing that even, believe it or not, coati-mundis and beavers cannot do, and that is think about acting. At any time they can act or they can think about acting. They can do combinations of them. So as life, if you now look at life, if you now look at the forced dialogue within you, wherein it seems as though you're talking to yourself, or those of you who are still kindergarten perception that you believe you're having thoughts. You're talking to yourself, you're engaged in a forced dialogue, you're engaged, in this case, for the example, into a forced interview, the same way as the president getting caught suddenly by a good old archetypical Sam Donaldson, and he insists, by God, answer the question, do you have a comment? So there it is. Life is making you respond to this dialogue, to this inquiry. But now to repeat, is life actually wanting to know what you, and you've got to add parenthetically, you and it, what you and it might do, what actions you might take in whatever it is, this part of the dialogue, or is it really and simply asking for your comments? That is, what thoughts about action you might have. When you're having this forced dialogue with yourself, when you are apparently thinking, this is really something I was going to throw out that those of you who are interested could take note of and look at yourself. Do you primarily, most of the time, some of the time, does there seem to be a weighted one-sidedness to the possibilities I was going to give when you are engaged in your inner thoughts, when you are being you here? Is it in the main you thinking about actions? Is your response to it what you may do? Or do you actually give responses on the basis of comments that you're not saying that I may do this, you give your thoughts on it? The president says, yes, tomorrow we plan to do such and such. That is, his comment is regarding actions we're going to take, or maybe he may say, well, even as we speak. Our ambassador is delivering a message to Prime Minister so-and-so. Or he can say, I am very concerned about the matter and I am weighing the alternatives, the possible responses. When you are engaged in what seems to be your own thoughts, not just daydream, but you seem to be thinking about something, about what I'll do about my job, or what I'll do about my anything that seems to be of specific importance enough to you that it deserves some comment. Do you primarily, if you can answer it that way, do you respond on the basis of, yes, even as I talk to myself, even as I think about this, I'm about to do so-and-so, or I will definitely do so-and-so in a few minutes or tomorrow? Or do you simply and really give a comment? Like, well, I'm concerned about that. All right, if you don't like that, I got a better question. Does life care? Okay, I got a better one than that. Sort of. Do you care? Can you see life and can you see you needing both? That there is no continuing proper one of the responses of the internal dialogue about what you might have to say about a certain matter. It sometimes, let us just go with the easy, speakable aspect and say sometimes it would seem to be apropos, life would seem to be needing no more than you too make a comment. That yes, I should do so-and-so, shouldn't I? Should I? Well, I am concerned over it. That you simply do make a comment. You do express some thought about action. And at other times, you apparently, and we're not worried about in what apparent way you can judge some success later, but that you actually not just comment, you comment on the basis of action either being taken, about to be taken, a promise to be taken. It seems to be energy making an unequivocal thoroughfare through your brain that yes, such and such will be done. That's my comment. But there's a difference between that and your comment that, well, I'm thinking about it. I'll have to get back to me on that. I'm not sure what steps would be most appropriate. I'm not sure the best way to go about this. Sort of a side between man and other creatures here, you could see that other creatures must do in all sorts of ways, like eat, while man must talk, must think. And there is, I suggest, a real correlation between that. Your best friend, perhaps in the non-human world, let's assume you pet lovers, is your dog or your cat. And besides, at weak moments of you imagining that it's talking to you or understanding what you're saying or laying around looking at you and thinking, what a swell fellow he is. Other than that, what do? Well, of course, mainly they sleep. Like all right-thinking animals and humans would do, but that's another story. What do they mainly do? All creatures, all sentient creatures, primarily, other than sleep, which is mainly what all animals do, is they eat. So let's just take that. That's really do, because sometimes they actually do have to do, and sometimes they have to engage in copulation, and etc. But let's just take eat, because other than sleep, that is it, is eat. But now what would be comparable to people? In other words, take away sleep. The rest of the time, whatever's left in an animal's life, the other 10 or 15 or 20% of their time that they're not sleeping, what are they doing? It's mainly, if you had to divide up a pie and draw a little chart, if we were still back in 8th grade and we're that smart, we could draw up a little pie chart. I don't know what kind of pie, doesn't matter. We draw up a pie chart, and the biggest slice would be eat. Now, where would it be with humans? Talk. I really meant for this to be just like a 10 or 15 second aside, but I want you to see there is a correlation. Animals, dogs, lions, most of their life, other than sleep, most of their life is spent eat, eat, eat. Now, there's got to be something. There's always something comparable in everything. You can write that down as a rule we won't get into. But everything's comparable to something, or we would not be in a three-dimensional world. What is comparable in humans? It's not eat, eat, eat. What is it? It's talk, talk, talk. That includes think, 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 by the way. Because you can sit at home by yourself and talk, talk, talk. And for those of you that missed last taping, don't say, well, I don't talk to myself. You dumb little... Do you think? Case closed. No, I don't know what kind of case it is. It was just case closed. Could you try something else? Is there any chance that any of you with... I think we could probably try and do this as a kind of mass thinking perception attempt, that all of you that had a good, humane, decent upbringing, at least an 8th grade education, could you try your best and get a kind of monkey grip peek on this possibility? Could you, by any way, see a correlation between what I've been referring to for our temporary maps as primary matters, to see a correlation between the primary affairs and action, and then secondary ones and thinking of action? Well, I thought I'd ask before I tried any more, so guess that took care of that. Yeah, what? No? All right, look at action this way. The action that we're talking about, that I am trying to sketch out, insofar as the two possibilities that humans can do of act and thinking of action. The latter possibility, I think, since self-definition self-defines itself, thinking of action requires that you think, which is a form of talk, of course. Whereas action, the other possibility, does not necessarily require talk. You could look at action as being silent. You could look upon primary affairs as being a kind of silent action. It doesn't have to be, but it can be, because primary affairs certainly do not require. They are not based on, and they are not dependent upon anything that is said about them, around them, by the people involved with it. Could I then present to you a query? Which requires the most attention? Which requires the most attention? That which is speakable or that which is silent? What is it that you think the most about? I already put it to you one way: actions or thinking about actions. Which one do you comment on the most? Now let's look at another way. Which do you think about, that is, give your most intellectual attention to, primary matters or secondary matters? And the slight variation into that, which do you give the most comments, that is, the most thought to? Silent matters or speakable matters? Which requires the most attention? There is a wider question that I wasn't going to really give you, but hell, I'll give it to you. No, I won't. All right. Consider the question involved with life instead of people. Keep that to yourself. Could you further take this kind of parallel running of these kinds of divisions of primary and secondary matters and actions and thinking of actions, the world of silence and the world of talk, and see that there is, if I wanted to be real crude, I could draw two columns and of course put some of those in one column and some in the other column and try and get you to see that there is a kind of parallel, at least three-dimensionally, nexus between them. But how about a little bit further? Could you see, look upon primary affairs, I know you think we've already said this, but let me just give some new terms for a particular way. Could you look upon primary affairs as being essential as opposed to being serious? Now, of course, my own division of primary affairs, I know I point out is that, for the sake of looking at and talking about, are those things are absolutely minimally essential to keep the organism of man going, sex and food and sleep and shelter. And so they're obviously essential, essential being that which is indispensable, that which is absolutely necessary, that which is pertinent to the actual essence of whatever we're talking about. And of course, staying alive is the essence of being alive. And so all the primary affairs would certainly be essential. But I bring it up in this way to make a comparison. Can you see the difference between that which would be essential primary affairs and that which would be serious that I am referring to in secondary affairs? And I will have to admit that I am stretching on the term serious just a little bit. But at least you have to take sarcastic quantum leaps in the dark on your own. You know, serious. I could call it unnecessarily serious. Now, we're not talking about from an ordinary city view now. We're talking about from up on the hillside, taking that kind of higher, like 8th grade peak or something. Unnecessarily serious. Or if you want to get real pushy, pseudo-serious. Which may sound nice, but it doesn't make any sense. But what the hell, right? Huh? All right. But serious being the ordinary definitions of grave and sober. That which can cause apprehension. Those are somewhere close to real definitions of the word. And now some of you who've been around a little bit, you must know that I am trying to twist it, turn it a little bit, to consider that secondary matters, although it's now become a relative situation as always, so that secondary matters are in their own way now essential in the city. It's essential that people talk. It's essential that people be involved in hobbies of all sorts. That is, people be involved now on a basis that they consider to be not just essential, but what? That's right, serious. All secondary aspects of all primary matters. By hobbies, I mean everything. Your occupation, your romantic life, not your sex life. You're interested in dining and cuisine, not eating. You're interested in fashion, not staying sheltered and warm or cool. But all of the secondary affairs that could be looked at from one very crude and absolutely anachronistic, insane, useless view, that all of these, many of these things I'm calling secondary in the city could be looked at from one view as being unnecessary. And I know that there still would be hermits around life, which is a form of, really, of hermetically attempting to seal off your intellect, not just yourself, but your intellect. Now, people that would still, and they've always been here throughout history, that point at everything in the city, using their own terms, and go tut-tut, to say the least. Beer cans in the road. Of course, it wasn't for beer cans in the road, they couldn't afford to be a hermit, but we don't have time to go in that. They wouldn't have, if it wasn't for trash, if it wasn't for us, and they're hollering, killing the environment, going to destroy Mother Earth. Look at this trash in the street. If it were not for the trash in the street, of course, the man denouncing this, perhaps he got it in a book. The book could not be published without the trash in the street. So from that kind of view, I just backed up again for everyone to understand that life still allows this to go on. Life still has its own inner factions attacking itself. That there are people, there are Cassandras shouting we're going to kill ourselves And most of what men do in the civilized, sophisticated, they would put in quotation marks, or between their fingers, I guess, they would denounce all of this. We should all be back wearing skins and probably down on our hands and knees, eating berries, and certainly not driving V8s, maybe four-cylinder imports, but back to nature, back to the simpler life like the gods intended. You know, no power steering and all that stuff. They laugh at power windows. Ha! But all of you should see by now that cannot be done. It should not be done. It is a part of life's reactionary system. It is a part of its own homeostatic balance for it to continually grap at itself. If you don't think that, look at all the powers and the force in you, coming through you, like somebody stuck an AC line in an orifice of your body, and it seems that you just have almost this unsuppressible desire continually, which is energy, to whine and bitch, to find fault. But it's not just you, it's life, one of life's factions, doing it to other parts. So it finds still that much of what's going on in life that is looked at normally, and it was referred to this way, this is not you, as all of you should know, that did finish the 8th grade, and don't you try to fool me. But they were doing it back in Grecian time, Roman times, they were doing it in the Far East even before that, of condemning good Greeks, even before they had the name Greeks, that think, hey, now living out here in the wilds of Macedonia, I don't know what they called it then, but I got to make a comparison. Now this is the life. You wouldn't catch me living in Athens. Have you been to Athens? They're wearing these sheets, and some of these, you wouldn't believe it, some of them got little colored threads around the edge of it, and they got flowers in their hair, and they're prancing along like they're the Queen of Sheba. And there's wine jars all over the streets. Boy, you wouldn't catch me there. That kind of life, the life is exemplified now in Athens, is going to be the ruination of this planet. There is part of life doing that, but back to all of you should see, regardless of that, is why this kind of activity is not to tell you how to cope, it's to tell you you ain't got to cope, because there's nothing to cope with. The point is, there's nothing wrong with Athens, there was nothing wrong with Rome, there's nothing wrong going on now. You don't have to like it, you don't have to dislike it, because if you know how, you don't have to cope with it, because there's nothing to cope with. To cope, you got to be a critic. To cope, you got to have a view, and it's got to be down at city level. And you go, my. And all views are what? Let's repeat it again. Serious. Not essential, but serious. There's no such thing as a non-serious view. There is no such thing to the individual as a non-serious secondary activity. Now this affords even greater expanded opportunities for Homo sapien to engage in beating up one another. Because everyone's hobby, now you got to take it from the personal view, everyone's secondary hobby is serious business. It reaches a point now, as it should, if you can begin to see it, it serves a quite efficient purpose. That people will now in the city, ordinary, sophisticated, educated, blah, blah, blah people, are now as inclined, if not more proclived, to engage in mayhem on the basis of arguments and disputes over secondary matters than they are over primary matters. That is, how nowadays in the city, how many opportunities arise for you to get into a fight over actual eating? Not dining, but eating. Which amounts to this: how often do you have to go out and beat someone up or rob them, take away their kill or whatever they found, the berries that they gathered today, that you have to go in and steal their berries to stay alive? Not hardly, folks. Except maybe you. You don't have to. And you do not really get in a fight if somebody says, do you eat food? And you went, well, yeah. And they go, boy, are you stupid? Well, I got to give you some example. How inclined are you to go, wait a minute, you can't call me stupid for eating? I mean, the only thing is this, if such an insane thing were to occur, the only thing that you would assume that you're sane, you would think the man is insane. But you could be sitting at a place in a restaurant and somebody say, what is that you're eating? I've never seen that. And you say, well, this, and you describe some kind of Montana cuisine. And you say, well, this is sauteed buttercup hips, and some kind of wine. And maybe the person says, maybe the person look at said, you know what I think? I don't think anybody with a goddamn zither brain would eat some kind of crap like that. Then you could get in a fight. Or you'd be standing at a bus station and somebody says, speaking of hobbies, what kind of hobby do you have? And you say, oh, I'm a filling daffodils. I'm a snap collector. And the guy goes, snap, that's the dumbest. You can get in a fight. But if a man says, speaking of hobbies, when it rains and gets real cold, do you try to get inside or get somewhere and stay warm? And if you're dumb enough to respond, and you went, well, yeah, and the guy goes, you're not inclined to get in a fight. You're inclined to move down to another bus stop. The general point of this being that I intended something by this new division, this temporary ad hoc verbal division of saying or asking you, could you see primary activities? Sex, eating, not dining. When I say sex, of course, I mean sex, not romance. Not that there's anything wrong with any of the secondary, but just to refresh your memory, speaking of sex and not romance, eating, not dining, the general welfare of your body staying within the limits of that your body can tolerate of the elements, that as opposed to fashion. Clothes keep you warm, to keep you out of the elements, as opposed to fashion. Could you see them as being the primary parts for me to temporarily call them essential? And even though I've already admitted again, what I'm about to call the secondary, in a sense, are essential, but to look at them as being essential, between the fingers, essential, and maybe between the thumbs, the others being serious. But of course, again, that which is essential, in a sense, is serious, right? But is it? Because think about the division of the columns if I had made it about into the silent and the talkable. The primary does not have to talk. Secondary must talk. And so now if you can see that secondary is always serious, then can you see no seriousness, or no talk, no seriousness? That if any of you need to see not just my simple division such as sex being primary and romance being secondary, and you might think, well, I can see what you mean, but the shades in between, that you can start asking yourself of how much of what I do, or how much of what I am thinking, how much of what seems to be my response to this forced dialogue asking me if I have a comment about something. Like, do I have a comment about this new hobby? Do I have a comment about this new political situation in such and such place? Do I have any comment to make, now that I read it, about someone's new economic theory to redistribute the wealth in the country? Do I have any comment to see, for reasons that you're going to have to find out for your own if you want to, that it does have a purpose, it has a useful purpose, as to how much would be in the general area that I'm calling primary and how much is secondary, is not only how much do I have to talk about it, if at all, how much talk does it seem to incur, inspire, how serious does it seem to be? To me. Forget any judgment, it's because it's just there. Is this serious for me? Can you find any way that you can, something that you can be serious about without talking about? Now, if any of you are really good, not you, and you were trying to run along the tracks with this verbally, then you could say, when I say that no talk, no seriousness, then you can say, well, wait a minute, you go back to the silent areas, the areas that do not require any supportive talk, such as sex. And you could say sex is serious, because without sex, the race would die. Or eating is serious. It's essential. But now by the definitions, by the world that I am woofing and weaving tonight, do you have to talk about it? Is there any circumstance under which you have got to talk about sex? I keep saying sex because I can't say... Well, I'm not trying to be crude, but I say sex, and that sounds verbally, nounly. Can you engage in copulation? And it be serious in the sense I'm saying. That is, and I know this is somewhere in the dictionary, I'm close, that it's grave, it's somber, and it helps produce apprehension. Now, if any of you tell me that the way you do it does that, or if that is the loaded example, then how about eating? When you're hungry, we're not talking about dining. You're just simply hungry and your body, and you eat. Do you ever eat? Eat now, not dine. Do you ever eat and it's grave? That it produces. It lends itself to apprehension. Again, if it does, Jesus, I don't hear about it. In other words, you're doing that which is life supportive. You're doing that which is essential, and it produces apprehension. You'll end up in the case book. I don't know which case. No, I told you that. Let me point out a little more. If you go ahead and you take the city, you take corporate, you take the institutional life that is given you, if you take it seriously, then no matter what field you're in, that is, no matter what secondary activities, no matter what hobbies you have, no matter what field you're in crisis control. If you're locked into always a day late, close the barn door now, throw some more sandbags up on the levee, that kind of crisis control, that kind of attempted containment, which we're about to get, as you might guess, into the intellectual aspect of it, the nervous system aspect of it, that you're attempting, like throw more sandbags on the levee, you're attempting to shore up a 3D dam to hold a 5D lake, which I'll leave it to you to figure out what kind of hobby you got on your hands, what kind of sub-occupation you have of crisis control and attempted crisis containment. But the thing is, if you go along with the city's plan, if you go along with whatever kind of institutional, apparently cultural, apparently personal, individual dynamics running you, then if you're in that kind of department, if that is what you're in, that is no matter what you think you're in, if you end up being in crisis control, then you'd never have any time to see about any possible research and development. Now, people do not look at it this way, but if you've got a good memory for a few seconds, notice how many people laugh when I said no matter what your area is, no matter what field, what occupation, avocations, but no matter what your field, what seems to be the main institution or structure on which you're standing in the city, no matter what you are, called doctor, attorney, Indian chief, ditch digger, your main job is crisis control. Remember what a laugh that got. That's not a joke, is it? You can go down to one of these comedy clubs and get up and there's a punchline of some joke, say, crisis control. It's not a joke, but notice how many people laughed. You know why, of course. They do not analyze it that way, but what is the main job that everyone has in the city? Now, I know some seem to be in charge of driving an ambulance. Some seem to be in charge of being policemen. Some seem to be in charge of being teachers. But what is everyone's job, really? Looked at from a certain way. You don't see it. Well, if you're going to deal with the obvious, if you're going to take life's first stories, you got to remember you're always is that great, and here at least I can refer to with some certainty, that beautiful area of, erstwhile area of Macedonia. I wanted to work it in somewhere. I know I could have talked about nuts, but I was trying to be serious. That great Macedonian philosopher said, always a day late and a dollar short. That is the basis of the ordinary nervous system reaction to the energies flowing through life's system. All right, look at real crude. That you could say with some degree of validity that humans do not act. No creatures act. They react. But if you're doing it here and thinking otherwise, you're in the situation of believing, I am up to one thing. I have one job. I have one interest right now. There's one thing I am attempting to do right now. And you're not. Now, I know people believe they are, and they're supposed to. But you're not actually pursuing some aim. You're engaged in crisis control. You're attempting to contain the problem. You already forgotten that great cosmic law that we discussed one time, that all problems are caused by somebody trying to help? That always gets a big laugh. Why? Because someone attempting to help without them knowing it. They're always involved with throw another sandbag on the levee. But this levee, if they get it completely shored up, if they turn it into a full dam, it's a 3D dam. And the lake, sad to say, has at least 2 more dimensions. The river has at least 2 more dimensions than any levee, any dam that the human intellect can construct. Not out there, which is true enough, but in here. It is thus a matter of crisis control. You could even look at the city as being a secondary aspect of something else. You could say the hillsides, but you could look at the city's prime job and its citizens' primary responsibility is being to keep life's energy rivers from overflowing their evolutionary banks in a totally catastrophic manner. Well, as I was doing that, I had more faith in it than that. I thought if we had a nice big Yankee Stadium collective sigh that we'd just stop. No such luck. If you look at the city as being all of the aspects, institutional, cultural, intellectual, artistic, scientific, everything that is indigenous and unique to man in this 3D world here on this planet. If you looked at all of that as being what I'm referring to collectively as city life, and then look at city life as being that in toto collection, the en masse activity of humanity in secondary affairs, because you would not have to be in the city, you would not have to be sociable, you would not have to be verbal just to stay alive, just to deal with the essentials, just to be involved with primary activities. So you can look at the city as being the living manifestation of secondary activities. So then, what I was presenting to you, you could look at city life. Take that in the full, all of civilization, the whole cultural, intellectual, speakable, unique life of man, you could look at as being the continuing attempt to keep the energy rivers of life itself, which are where we're all fed from right now, from overflowing, which they're always attempting to do, their evolutionary banks and levees in a manner that would prove catastrophic. That is, it would become suicidal to life itself. Sometimes backing up helps, and sometimes you run the risk of severe tire damage, I know. But I trust most of you that tried to follow me through it one more time at least have triple steel belted, if not capped radials, and that you survived it. But don't you see? Life itself, and look at you. If you're alive, if you are just the middle class in life's bell curve, if you're vivacious, vigorous, just ordinarily so, you're always straining at your own evolutionary banks, if you look at you as being a river. Always. You're always on the verge of this flywheel coming apart. Not really, but that's the way it feels. Because life is attempting to grow. The pressure there in my old rubber glove, remember? It's full of the moosh. You know, that's us. Man's intellect. And life is squeezing. It's getting bigger, fatter, and healthier, and more intelligent. But it's always on the verge, the possibility at least is there, of there being a rupture somewhere, of it overflowing. That I'm getting too smart. Well, I've gone too far this time. Life does it all the time. You just don't notice it. Down at our level, it's known as history. Okay. You think about that in your spare time. You can look upon the unique aspect, that is the city, that is the secondary affairs of Homo sapien, as being a kind of continuing shoring up, reinforcing of dams, levees, the banks themselves of life's own primal energy flowing right through us, and we're part of the attempt to keep it within certain evolutionary, that is, reasonable, non-suicidal bounds. And you wonder why you feel tired? Jesus. Forget the little story, which you might now figure out how it came about, because it wasn't an actual occurrence, about the little Dutch boy and his finger in the dike. No. That was just kind of kindergarten crude story of this so that people wouldn't feel all bad, because the real version for the grown-ups away from this place, the real story is not a little kid with his finger in the dike holding back whatever dam, whatever like it was in the Netherlands, but you got to see everybody, everybody, and you got your little back, not your finger, you got your little back 24 hours a day, 72 years, you got your little back up against this levee, up against this dam. You are the riverbank, and this stuff is flooding through, and it takes all the energy you got to hold it right there. And sometimes it breaks a little. They have to bury those people. They have to put them away in homes, hospitals, prisons. Sometimes a lot of it gives away. And that's when, maybe some of you can follow a little better, is known as real history. But then it gathers itself back up. You might finally note that in all of these affairs, if you're just still running on regular, if you're down the city and you're just thinking just the bare minimum, just what you have to, just what life makes you think. That is, you're responding to the inquiries in your forced dialogue and what seems to be the inquiries even from without. Or do you have any comments on this? If your comments are just on the basis of whatever you must comment, just that, no more. Just like the president, they say, would you have any comment on this? And you say, we're watching the situation. And the reporter says, hey, that's not much of an answer. Those people are dying over there, and you're saying that you're just thinking about it. What kind of answer is that? And of course, this doesn't really happen in life, but you could picture the president saying, well, hey, give me a break. I said I was thinking about it. And what he really would be saying is, I thought about all I want to right now. I thought about all I can. Or I thought about it, and I don't know what to do. So that's what I thought about this far, so shut up. Don't ask me. Now forget, of course, the president and the press corps. How about you? How many times has part of the dialogue said, why don't you do so-and-so? Why don't you quit drinking or smoking, or why don't you quit eating so much? Why don't you quit being so dumb? Whatever it is. And you say, well, I'm thinking about it. That's my comment. And then they press on. That's not much of a comment. You said that yesterday. And what do you feel? You don't necessarily act like the president. Some of you probably do internally. They say, would you shut up? But at the very least, what do? The reaction to a continuing pestering, continuing solicitation about, well, that's not much of a comment, we'd like more. With humans, inside, personally, the nervous system, it normally turns into, what is it? It starts with a G. Well, there's one that starts with a P. Another, it's not gopher. Guilt! Guilt. And then the other one I had starts with a P. Platypus? No. Pressure, stress. See, the president, when they say, well, that's not much of a comment. That's a serious matter going on, and you say you're thinking about it. Just as likely, the president, instead of saying, well, hey, give me a break, I'm thinking about it, I told you, just as likely would him go, which would infer like, well, don't ask me anymore. But what is it then? It's like, what ordinary people think. Stress, widespread guilt and depression. But guilt like, well, I know that's not much of an answer. I know it's not the full comment. That's the only comment I got. Shut up. That's what everybody else calls guilt. Sometimes they try to limit it to some kind of city structure or institution inside of a church or a temple. Or it's in here. It's the basis that the comment is not quite adequate. And of course, then you take it personally, but it's life asking its own comment through you, and what it has you say, your comment, either on action or your thinking of actions, is not totally satisfying. But then if you get good, you can play Gomer Pyle, say, surprise, surprise. It's not totally satisfying because that's not the end of it. But as long as you're living in city, in the smog in the city of the episodic life, the solicitation for a comment is supposed to be a total scene. In this case, in the president's life, or in the reporter's life, asking whoever's life it is. Everybody thinks the movie's about them, that they're starring. And so it seems to be a one scene. Well, Mr. President, the pressing affairs going on Country X right now, do you have any comment thereon? And he's supposed to say something like, well, yes, we're going to send troops tomorrow, or I'm trying to consider our alternatives. And it's supposed to be something, and him to say it, and the comment seems to satisfy the scene from somebody's view. And they go, well, thank you, sir. And he's off. On the plane, he's gone. But there is no such thing as a final scene. I mean, the closest it seems to be here on this plane is why everyone enjoys it so much is death. But there is no final scene, but episodic consciousness is operating on the basis that there is some explanation. Sequential life is cut up into little scenes, and you sort of take the best, do the best with it as you can. But what I was going to say was down in the city, if you're going to operate on this basis, if you're going ahead and be carried along with this, and all it is you're running on regular, you're just doing what you've got to do, you are supporting what it amounts to. You are supporting somebody else's institutions. You're working in somebody else's job, no matter it seems to be your slot. You're working for them, at least in crisis control. You think that, well, I did become an ostrich farmer. That's what I always wanted to do, and now I am one. But you're not. Your real job is crisis control. And you didn't select that. And we're bypassing all the question of selecting this and that. But your own comments to yourself, your own forced dialogue is, well, I'm more or less decided to become a shepherd, a sign painter. But then to realize, well, this is not really my job. I know I apparently do this, and I know I come to a place that says Bill's Sign Shop, and I'm Bill, and I come here and do it. But what's my main job in life once you see it? It's crisis control. What is my main job in life in the city? It's to hold the evolutionary banks within some sort of check so that life does not burst at the seams, so that I do not burst at the seams as we grow. But when you're down there, engaged in this, what I was going to get to, is you are intellectually then running at somebody else's pace. You're operating at someone else's tempo. Of course, it's someone else. I can say it's some other institution. It's the general pressure of the city. Of course, it's life's tempo. But we can't, that's too far. We can't stay and talk about that, as you know, because then the balloon goes up and you keep standing around waiting for them to chill the champagne and to light the mother up, and it's already gone. So you can't, but I just thought I'd throw it in just so you wouldn't think that I had forgotten. But you end up working, and it appears to be, you can slice it up in all sorts of ways to look at it, whatever would be profitable to you at any particular ad hoc moment from any particular view, but you are operating, you're working for someone else, you're toiling for someone else's institution, you're standing on someone else's structure, and what it amounts to specifically now, intellectually, forget all the physicals of painting signs and shepherding ostriches, if indeed they can be shepherded, is intellectually you are being run then at somebody else's pace. Not even the illusion of your own once you see it. And back to the method I suggested that you consider, if there was such a method that I just made up, of continually, willfully thinking more than you have to. Which I'm glad that no one on tape, if this has ever been shown on tape, no one has ever written me to complain about that or to ask for further details. Which shows that we're either getting a lower or a higher class of people listening to this. I don't want to think about it either. If you willfully continually think more than you have to, which is self-explanatory, except for those who cannot think more than they have to, and then they will end up writing me. If you can do that, if you continually try and think more than you have to, And that's the beginning and then the quotation marks, as you know. There's nothing else to say. I'm not going to say anymore. Think more than you have to. Then, by God, you can begin to set your own pace. Which I would like to propose, to suggest for a would-be subversive, radical, cheerful new thinker to be able to set your own intellectual pace is a good and neat thing to do. And that is my platform if you will vote for him.